Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, how are you, man? We have gotten through another year, 2024, last show of the year. How you been, man?
I'm good. Yeah, I mean, thankful to have another year under our belts for sure. And we'll do a little bit of a recap. We'll do a little bit of predictions today. But also, too, I think there's this underlying theme that we talked about before we hit record here, which is just shit's moving really fast, man. Like stuff at the beginning of the year is not stuff at the end of the year.
Yeah. I think that's the theme for today. So, a couple of housekeeping things before we dive into it. This is going to be a little bit of think of it as sort of cloud news of the month for December, a little bit, but mostly it's going to be sort of news of the year. We're going to kind of go through the year. We're going to look at what changed a lot from, say, Q1 to Q4. And then we're going to make some predictions, as we often do, which, for those of you that spend any time in the betting markets, these are not predictions you necessarily want to put you want to put your mortgage on. Anyways, a couple of things real quick. So first off, thank you to everybody who listens. Thanks to everybody who, gives us 20 minutes a week, 30 minutes a week, 60 minutes a week in some cases. So thank you all for, listening, for telling a friend, for, sending us in feedback and comments. We appreciate that. Real quick, thank you to all the sponsors for the year. We were very lucky to have another sort of diverse set of sponsors. So real quick, Panoptica, which is a part of Cisco, the folks at theCUBE, Oracle, Gartner, Cloud Zero, Microsoft Azure, WSO2, Neo4j, ChatPods, interesting new podcast app that does a little bit of AI stuff, and Data Citizens Dialogues, which lots of plurals in there, which I frequently got wrong in the ad reads. But thank you to all of our sponsors. They make it possible for us to keep doing this stuff, and hopefully, the things that they're providing to you are helpful.
Yep.
Real quick, man. So we always do this. We used to do all kinds of stuff. We'd count the number of minutes and all that stuff. I kind of lost track of that spreadsheet. This is show 884. We are cranking out about 100 a year. In some cases, for some reason, I don't know how the math of this worked. I think we did like 102 this year, which I don't quite understand. I guess I do understand if there's 52 weeks in a year. So we did about 102.
Yeah, but we take 2 weeks off, so it should be 50.
That's right. I had it in my mind a year.
We work 50 here at the Cloudcast.
That's right. Yeah, I had it in my mind that 50 was a year, but it is 52. So this is our 14th full year of doing this thing. We started February of 11, but we'll call that a full year. We're cranking out 100 of a year. This is the time of year I think when you and I always get together and we go, do we want to do we keep doing this forever? Do we just go to do we do this to 1,000 shows? It would feel a little bit weird to sort of stop doing it, when we have this new trend coming along. But at the same time, you do often wonder, and you ponder these things as you're walking the dogs, like, have we been doing this for too long for people? Are they sick and tired of us? So those are the things we'll be pondering as we get into 2025, as we get close to, we'll go past the 900th show probably in early February or something like that. And then we'll have to figure out what 1,000 looks like. Seems like a lot.
No one's bought us yet.
That's true.
We are for sale.
That's right.
There is a price.
That's right.
Just so everyone knows,
it might be a small price at this point in time.
Yeah. Pat Gelsinger could afford us. I'm just saying.
He could afford us, and he might be the sort of the poster boy for, things can change in a year. Be careful what you wish for. So what I did was, and I don't know if we'll put all this in the show notes. We'll put it in something that'll be linked in the show notes, so folks can see this. I kind of went through and pulled out, both on the cloud side and on the AI side, some big things that happened in Q1 through Q4. So we did it on a quarterly basis. We're not going to go through all these. But what we did want to kind of do is, like Aaron said, stuff feels like, again, right now, and partially it's, I think, because one ecosystem is sort of stabilized in terms of cloud. So those things that change aren't as big. And then you've got this new sort of ecosystem trend with AI coming along, which, crazy stuff's going on, lots of money's pouring in. And so we're going to kind of contrast those from quarter to quarter, just to sort of show what happens in a year, especially if you're new to this world, and you're like, is this normal that things kind of change fast? It ebbs and flows. It depends from year to year. So this will be an interesting exercise. Why don't we start with Q1? And I'm gonna do this. We'll each take a quarter, and you can pick either cloud or AI. Kind of paint a narrative for the quarter, and then we'll do a little bit of commentary around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you want to start with?
Let's do Q1 Cloud.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I got it. So, like, okay, the biggest thing I would say right now, and this, led to big changes, the AWS and the strategy and the AI strategy early in the year, right? You had Selipsky and then everything that happened with him, and then the AI strategy was very lacking, and then it felt a little bit like the knee-jerk reaction of like, hey, let's go invest a whole bunch of money in Anthropic, and then, oh, by the way, and we'll announce it as we move to Q4, like, hey, we got our own models now. And so it was very noticeable that AWS's AI strategy and just AWS in general was struggling in Q1. And then Broadcom really, they announced the big changes to the VMware pricing, and that led to a pretty disruptive year to, I'm willing to bet, everyone that listens to this podcast. The CNCF, there was, a bit of a mix up of like, hey, there's some stalwart companies that are kind of keeping a bunch of projects going. And then what happens when some of those projects change? And can a project go from incubating to mature to back to incubating? Like, there was a whole thing going on with all of that. And that's where just this, open source companies and open source strategies and rug pulls was introduced. It started in the crypto market, but now we had open source rug pulls.
Yeah. So I think that's a good starting point. We started with cloud, and cloud felt like, the couple of pillars that people knew a lot about. AWS felt a little bit uncertain for the first time in a decade plus. Really ever. VMware felt like people were like, okay, this is what the new thing looks like, and it felt weird, right? Because it went from being a sort of your friend, sort of your friendly company that did interesting technology to, oh, this feels like Oracle 2.0, licensing changes. And then, the CNCF was starting to face a little bit of existential crisis of, well, are things stable, and our projects stable? Are companies that are supporting the main things stable, and so forth? So interesting start to the year on the cloud side. On the AI side, it was a little bit of uncertainty. So we were coming out of the original thanks firing with Sam Altman from the year before. Google immediately kind of comes out, so ChatGPT-4 or GPT-4 is out there. ChatGPT is kind of making waves, and they come out with Gemini 1.5. So it was sort of their first time of being like, here is this commercial, big model, big, huge, super capable, GPT-4 like LLM that was out there. And Google went through a few little weird things at the beginning of the year where it was like some of the stuff felt like it was a little bit, I don't want to say censored, but like there was some weird stuff they did in there. But they've been generally kind of straightened themselves out as the year went along. We started to see Microsoft have sort of the second order thing started to happen in terms of like, what is your partnership with OpenAI, right? They started having partnerships with other companies. NVIDIA became the most valuable company in the world by stock value. So all of a sudden, the little gaming company that made, GPUs and so forth was now the biggest company in the world. Jensen had done his world tour the quarter before for everybody's trade show. And then, we started seeing the beginning of a lot of companies were selling their data to the LLMs, right? So we ended the year with people being like, there's not enough data left. We started the year with every data source, whether it was Reddit or whether it was newspapers or whether it was other things, being like, sure, we will monetize our data to these things. And that, was sort of seemed like a big deal at the time. We got towards the end of the year and it was like, we don't have enough data. We don't, like it was that sort of stuff. So it was interesting to sort of watch. We saw a lot of responses early on. The last thing that was happening at the beginning of Q1, and this I think we'll continue to see, although it'll be interesting to see how it's tempered. This is where we're starting to see people talk about trillions of dollars of funding being needed, completely rethinking. This was the beginning of sort of Sam Altman kind of painting this picture of 20 years in the future, what type of investments were going to be needed. AI was going to be at the center of every part of everybody's life, these sort of like crazy grandiose things. And people were like, that's a lot of money, right? That's gonna. So yeah, that's sort of where we started the year. An interesting place to start. Felt like a little bit of shaky grounds in Q1 in a lot of places, and that got folks a little bit concerned about things.
Yeah, I mean, you think about this, like between AWS, open source communities, the CNCF, and Broadcom, I mean, 3 really big shakeups in 3 areas that have been really stable.
Yeah.
For a long time. So yeah, absolutely. Shaky start. All right, let's move on to Q2.
Well, I'll take cloud in Q2 then. Q2 starts, big first acquisition of the year. IBM announces intent to acquire HashiCorp for $6.4 billion. So HashiCorp, obviously, we covered them a lot on the show, famous for things like Terraform and a whole bunch of other, Vault and other, kind of open source tools. They had gone public. They had begun to monetize some of it. So I think they were doing maybe $150 million in revenue or so. A lot of it, if you didn't dig into it, was Vault. But IBM, intends to announce this. Just to put it in context, when you make a big acquisition like this, even though HashiCorp, the company, isn't huge, probably maybe a couple of thousand people, I don't know the exact number. We are now at the end of December, and that acquisition has still not closed. So when you're spending a lot of money for a big company, there's lots of sort of regulation, lots of approvals from lots of countries that has to happen. So that was the first thing that kicked off. Second big thing, the cloud providers started putting their earning numbers out there. Remember, 2022, 2023, some folks were getting a little concerned that maybe the big clouds had sort of stopped growing at the pace they were going to grow. Maybe people weren't going to adopt the cloud. Their earnings were back to normal. In fact, we're starting to see them start to put their AI numbers in there, and a lot of that was people chewing up GPUs, not necessarily their customers making money, but they were making money. Amazon went past $100 billion in revenue, big thing. And as Q1 bleeds into Q2, AWS said, nope, we're tired of you guys being concerned about our strategy. We're concerned, we're tired of you thinking we may not be knowing what we're doing. Matt Garman gets named as the new CEO in May of 2024. So by that time, the cloud providers had sort of stabilized the ship, all 3 of them. Google, in fact, was sort of showing sort of more breakaway than the others. But $100 billion for Amazon. Amazon had a new CEO. And we were starting to see some acquisitions come back into play, which was interesting, and I guess always interesting and good for our industry for the most part.
Yeah.
What about AI?
So AI, I think and again, like this concerning and changing things starts the quarter with, we started to see a lot of AI acquihires, but the concerning part about it, because acquihires have always been a thing, was, hey, we're going to basically buy the founders, and then basically all the options and for all the employees, they don't get paid out.
Yeah.
And so that was the most concerning thing, because for a lot of folks that have been around the startup industry for a while, it's like, oh crap, is this the new model where basically, the founders always made money, but are we to a point where only the founders make money? And that was it happened for a while, Q2 and Q3. I hadn't heard much about it in Q4.
Yeah.
So hopefully that is a trend that kind of came and went, but we'll see. We'll see. Time will tell.
Well, and it was also a lot of AI startups who I think realized we can't make it because the cost of being an AI startup is GPUs and all that stuff. And it felt like a lot of, and if you look at them, like a lot of them were like, well, so-and-so used to be part of Google Brain or Google DeepMind, or they previously were OpenAI, or, and so they were kind of going back to, okay, you tried your hand, it didn't necessarily work, come back to the mothership, get back with all the other, data scientists, and then go build the big model.
Yep, absolutely. And then, so NVIDIA announced the pricing for the Blackwell chips, which still not quite out, but coming out before too much longer, and $30,000+ for the GPU. So not getting any cheaper. Sure.
And put it in perspective, right? This is where you start seeing companies, the Metas and the OpenAIs and Grok and all those sort of things saying like, we're building we're building clusters of 100,000 GPUs or 250,000 GPUs. So you, know, you do the math, put that in perspective as to what people are spending on these things.
Yes. And then we started to see, and we actually predicted this on the predictions last year, but unfortunately it probably didn't take off like I thought it was going to take off this year, but the rise of the SLM, the small language model. So Microsoft had the first big one that was really usable was the Phi 3 model. And it was really interesting to see that. But again, will small language models take over as we move forward? And we'll get into it with predictions and looking forward with like Agentic AI and AI pipelines where multiple models you come into play as opposed to one big large language model. We'll see. Right. And then a bunch of acquisitions, and NVIDIA picked up a few companies. One of note was Run AI. So Cloudcast alum. Run AI was picked up for $700 million, so it's certainly good for them. And by the way, good fit. It was a good software stack, good company, and I'm really glad that NVIDIA picked them up. But then, and this is if you follow, there's a book out there called Play Bigger. I encourage everyone to go read it because it really helps everyone understand marketing and categories and business categories. But lots of enterprise companies decided to enter the LLM model. Right, like Red Hat and IBM has some, Snowflake, Databricks, Observe, Honeycomb, and then the list just goes on and on. Everyone has their own LLM now, but in the category of LLMs, and I'll leave it for everyone to just go read it. Is there enough room for something like that? And are any of them ever going to be successful? Who knows? IBM Intelligence, IBM, Apple Intelligence did their beta, and it's slowly coming out. It's unfortunately been a bit delayed, but requires the newest phone. I'm a tech curmudgeon at this point. I don't have a phone that can run it. My wife and the kids all have updated phones, and they can run it, and they're having fun with it. But I haven't explored it at all. Yeah,
I've heard very mediocre, very sort of hushed tones about Apple Intelligence. So
yes. But I'll add this: the last trend is, and I think this trend continued throughout the whole year. This is where we finally started to see in the trough of disillusionment for AI, specifically around ROI, right? Like as you mentioned, GPUs aren't getting any cheaper, and the software stacks aren't getting any cheaper, and the data pipelines and everything else that is needed, and the data scientists. Well, at the end of the day, the leading use case was at the time was chatbots.
Yeah.
Well, that's really, really expensive chatbot. And how do you measure ROI on a chatbot?
Right.
And so that is certainly something that will continue to be something, and actually is one of my predictions for 2025. But go ahead.
Yeah, it does. You know, like the initial ROI is really kind of a weird thing because, you know, if you said, hey, let's summarize 2024 in terms of like use cases that people can point to, it's going to be like, you know, aside from the, hey, I made a new avatar for my social media thing and I look, 20 years younger and handsome and all that kind of stuff. People are going to go, well, we deployed some chatbots and we gave our developers this Copilot tool, right? Like those are the two most common sort of use cases and variations of the chatbot stuff. And yeah, the tough part with the ROI stuff is I got to imagine there was a whole bunch of CIOs or even CEOs who did the thing that they did back in the cloud days where they were like, okay, I went to a conference, I talked to somebody, they said it was going to be awesome, and they started deploying it. It was like, oh crap, it's not as much as I thought. But the hard part about this one is going to be, so like if you're trying to figure out ROI for like chatbots, right? Like you start to very, very quickly get into a thing where you either go, okay, is 20 or 30% better? Like we're resolving cases from my call center better or whatever, or do I have to start counting in people? Like how many people did we get rid of? And I don't know that they're ready to sort of start doing that stuff yet, right? And that may change over time, like ebbs and flows of how people want to talk about stuff. But that one's going to be an interesting one. Okay,
yeah,
so
absolutely,
we're halfway through the year. We've got the clouds are back to making money. We sort of know where some of the stalwarts are. So Q3 comes along, and Q3 is always a weird quarter because usually not a lot of announcements, at least big announcements. People are going on summer vacations. It's, people are thinking less about work and trying to think about getting away for a little bit. The kids are out of school. I'll take the AI sort of starting point. This was a lot of sort of big picture things happening in the summertime. So first time you see the United States White House, the United States sort of government making some statements about AI and open source. And this is where you're starting to see this big fight starting to happen with sort of Silicon Valley, the VC class, right? So the A16Zs, all the venture capitalists, and they're starting to say like, hey, even though they've benefited for years and years from the growth of the internet and the growth of Facebook and the growth of Google and all these sort of things, now they're like, okay, if we start investing in AI, like our companies are going to lose to those guys, right? Because they've seen companies getting acquired, and they very much want to see open source be kind of required. They want the government to sort of step in and say, hey, open source should be a requirement of AI. And the U.S. government comes back and goes like, no, we don't necessarily want to do that. And that's a vast understatement of all the complexities of what happened. But anyways, it was the first time you started seeing the U.S. government start to make some statements about direction they might go with AI regulation, right? You start seeing some cracks in the armor for NVIDIA, right? The Blackwell chips are delayed, at least. They, like you said, they were announced. A lot of them have been sold out, but they're not necessarily coming out as fast. So there's a little bit of concern there, right? And that concern about NVIDIA has been that we will see this ongoing theme throughout the year, even though their stock continued to kind of break all sorts of records and so forth. You keep seeing OpenAI working on this huge round of funding, and I say huge round, like huge in the context, and we'll get to it towards the end. Not so much the amount of money, but the value of the company, right? So, trying to make sure everybody was going to do that. And this is where you start to get into sort of some interesting things where, Apple was going to invest, NVIDIA was going to invest, like it was like, okay, who are the investors, and do the investors look like they're going to become the right partners for OpenAI or not? You get towards the latter part of the quarter, and the government stuff starts to kick in again, right? And you covered this on at least one of the shows. State of California had their own AI safety bill, which got rejected, and this caused all sorts of turmoil with VCs. It kind of a complicated thing. The EU started having their own sort of rules around this, and then you started seeing some numbers fly out there, right? So OpenAI said, hey, we're losing 2 billion plus a year, right? So we're making 3 billion, but we're losing 5 to 6 billion a year. And this is where you start to see the very much change of OpenAI from, we are this nonprofit to they officially filed to be a for-profit company. And, we see some shakeup there, but lots of sort of big things that have to do with regulation, that have to do with funding. This is like think piece central for the AI in Q3, because, there wasn't necessarily tons and tons of stuff, but the stuff that did come out, people were like, okay, this has world-reaching ramifications, and lots of opinions floating around.
Yeah, and I would add too, like one of the big things around that, because what you see in Q3 is a reaction to a lot of the trends in Q1, right? So to take it back out for a second, like for folks that are listening, like always start to think about this of like, hey, what does this mean in 2 quarters from now, 3 quarters from now? Because it usually takes that long for the ripples to expand out and action to be taken. And when it comes to the regulation stuff, I think a lot of the reasons why a lot of the regulation stuff didn't pass, or like got neutered or got watered down or all these other things, is just because I don't think a lot of folks truly understand how to do it. Because it's like, do you regulate the model? Do you regulate the weights and it's used? Do you regulate the training data? Do you look at all of those things? Like, it just gets really complex really quick, and your average, politician and regulator isn't going to be able to wrap their head around that. And so it's no surprise the first batch of regulation and legislation fell a little flat. Right. I mean, it's like a first draft of anything.
Well, and it's it's the trick of, do you like, for example, like when do you regulate, right? Like, are we at the beginning of growth? Do we want to slow down growth at the beginning? Do we want to let the thing get out away from us? Can you kind of the old thing of like, once the horse is out of the barn, can you get it back in the barn? But the other part of all this stuff is, for all the complaining about it, in essence, unless the regulation were to like shut you down, most of at least the big companies have figured out, like, I can just pay fines. I can pay my way out of any rules that we break. And so I think there is a lot of skepticism about like, will any of this stuff ever come around? And the flip side of all of it is like, well, the market sort of works itself out. Although the market does sort of work itself out into 2 or 3 very, very, very large companies. So understand at least where the investment community is concerned about this stuff.
Absolutely. So let's talk about cloud in Q3. So I think this one is definitely impacted the entire world. CrowdStrike had the massive outage that just impacted systems all over the world. I mean, the one that made the headlines was all the airlines, like, a lot of airlines, especially Delta, and Delta ended up suing CrowdStrike. And I think you got hit, didn't you?
We were, everybody was on, a lot of people on summer vacation. We were in the Bahamas, and it was a lot of like, are the planes going to leave? Which I wouldn't have had a problem staying in the Bahamas for a few more days, but this had its moment of, this was everybody realizing like how interconnected systems are, and and of course everybody became a security expert for 2 or 3 days on Twitter how you ought to fix this, but.
Yeah, and it is amazing how when you really dig under the covers, and so a good friend of the show, Matt Ray, on Software Defined Talk, he had a really, really good take on all of this, and I'm not going to repeat it all now because it's really long and involved, but it is surprising how involved CrowdStrike and Windows and Microsoft security is these days. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then also a big acquisition that did not go through. Google decided they were going to buy Wiz, and then they decided they weren't going to buy Wiz. So everyone at Wiz was super happy for a little while, and then not happy.
Had you heard of Wiz before this?
Like briefly. But if you would have had to say, hey, who is Wiz, I would have been like, oh, they're like maybe some small startup somewhere, something like.
I was like
23 billion. Holy crap!
Yeah, like let's put this in perspective. We probably had HashiCorp on the podcast. Now, granted, they do infrastructure, but like we cover security. At least we dabble in it. We had them on the podcast no less than 5 times, 6 times. In 14 years. And they sold for $6 billion. Yeah, I don't ever remember Wiz ever being on our radar map. So, anyways, good for them. It sounds like they're doing very well. $23 billion is a lot of money to walk away from.
Lots of money in security and lots of money in AI, man.
There's always seems to be money in former Israeli company, former Israeli defense people building security companies for sure.
Exactly. So, and then there was some interesting trends within the industry. Will these continue or not? We'll see. But I mean, there was lots of articles and kind of a blip on the radar of like developers are starting to struggle to find jobs. And is this because of AI? Like, is it, Copilot truly isn't Copilot, it's Pilot, right? Like, is it taking over, right? And then there's a little bit of software revenues. They were continuing to struggle. And then Intel, did this massive layoff. And oh, by the way, now that we look back, that was probably the first domino to fall for Pat Gelsinger. And we didn't know it at the time, but it was probably the first big signal that things were really bad over there. Yeah. But on the flip side, there were some things that happened that were good. Dell's AI server business is now larger than VMware, which is, when you think about it, like Dell bought VMware and then like sold off VMware, and so some people scratch their heads and then they're like, I'll just go build another business. Like,
Dell is sort of funny. The only time we talk about Dell, and I feel like the only time the industry talks about Dell, is when there is something that is completely outside of Dell's control, but they happen to be at the right place. I mean, like, COVID happened and it was like, look at Dell's laptop and printer business. And it was like, well, yeah, okay, everybody's working from home. They bought an extra laptop, or AI takes off and Dell happens to be there to catch it and put a bunch of GPUs and servers. It's interesting.
Why don't we move on to Q4?
Yeah, let's do that. So last quarter of the year, we've covered a lot of this, I feel like, very recently. So this one's going to be a little bit shorter. So I'll start with AI. I'll let you finish with cloud, since we are the Cloudcast. The big OpenAI raise, $6.5 billion at $150 billion valuation happens. I'm sure there are tons of OpenAI people, because one of the things they've been talking about forever is they're going to let those folks, sell a lot of their stuff on the secondary market. So hopefully, lots of OpenAI folks are having very exciting holiday seasons. Getting away to faraway places.
Let me say this real quick too. Maybe we'll get back to doing some Sunday perspectives on career advice in the new year. And hey, there's always that, open false promise that Aaron will do a Sunday perspective at some point. But I will say this, and I won't say which company because I don't want to dig too much into the past, but I will simply say, based off of doing a bunch of startups in the past, if you're out there and considering a startup, always, 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 always look for, can you sell your options on the secondary market?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's quick bit of career advice to throw in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, especially since the final markets aren't always going to be available to you. So they raised a lot of money. I think the biggest thing that jumped out at a lot of folks was, they had announced the previous quarter that they burned through, $5 billion, in the previous year as they were growing. And then you go, well, you raised $6.5 billion. So you bought yourself a year, right? Like, or a year and a half or whatever.
Who would have ever thought like $6 billion gets you 1 year of burn rate?
That's right. Especially as people talk about, the next model to train the next model is going to be 10 times as much as the last model. So, we started to see some folks, fighting back a little bit. AMD started announcing some new chips. I don't know that it's necessarily gotten a lot of interaction. Like I said early on, everybody was selling their data to the AI companies. We got towards the end of the year and everybody was sort of talking about, or at least the beginning of talking about, we don't have enough data left and the scaling of this thing is starting to slow down. So, interesting to watch in less than a calendar year, either how much we don't understand about what it takes to train these models, or the pace at which they're changing is good, but also like overwhelming itself. And it will be interesting to see what sort of cooling down periods we get. And then finally, NVIDIA once again said, hey, for all of the things that you guys beat us up about, we announced our earnings, we blew them away, we were up 100% year over year, but really only had about 5 or 6 really big customers, right? So we started to see a lot of, is this going to be Cisco 2.0? Because if their customers aren't making money, does NVIDIA continue to make money? Do people continue to pay the premiums for the latest and greatest chips all the time? So that one's going to be interesting going into 2025. Although they are, as we've been told, sold out for the next 12 months. So maybe it really becomes a 2026 sort of interesting conversation around NVIDIA.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up the cloud stuff, and then we'll do some quick predictions.
Sure, absolutely. And we've talked about it many times on the show, and maybe it's just because it's near and dear to our hearts. But AWS, Amazon, they went back to 5 days RTO. So that those return to the office mandates continue. We saw Dell earlier this year. One of my former companies also announced a big one here recently. I don't know if they're public or not, so I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, I think AT&T just announced a big one, so that's a big thing.
So
yeah,
the pendulum has swung back hard, and it's fine. I think that was just a natural progression of the market, and it'll settle into something in 2026. But anyway, and then the big 3 clouds. I mean, continue to grow revenue, continue to print money. The FTC and the DOJ, the Department of Justice, they went after both Microsoft and Google for antitrust stuff. So we're starting to see a little bit of government kind of going, hey, how big are y'all? And do you need to be that big?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The cloud opportunity was targeted for $1 trillion with a T, and at least that's the first time I had seen it, estimated at that. And it makes sense, if AWS is by themselves doing 100 billion, it makes sense to move the bar up a little bit. And then AWS reInvent, I think I think this is going to be all companies going forward, but I think they're the first ones and probably the biggest ones, because I think at this point, their keynotes are probably the most scrutinized in our industry. Trying to find this balance between cloud and AI going forward. Yeah. What's going to make money, what's aspirational, what's in the future, what's on the truck today. There's all these different triggers and levers to pull. You want to be seen as somebody who's going into the future, but let's be honest, and we've said it many times on this show, the stuff that makes money is often the non-sexy stuff.
Yep. All right, real quick, let's go through predictions that are sure to be at least slightly wrong, if not potentially completely wrong. But why don't you go first? We'll just kind of bounce back and forth real quick.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm going to say most of mine are AI related, by the way. And I mentioned this earlier on the show, AI ROI. I think the ROI on AI, and by the way, I talk to customers about this, and so I have these conversations on a semi-regular basis. There's two big things that is holding the industry back: supply chain. So, and we talked about NVIDIA,
chips, yep.
and then ROI. Like, if I'm going to do this, I'm not doing most AI projects on a 3 to 5 year ROI anymore. Like, it's on a 12-month, maybe 18-month ROI. And oh, by the way, the stuff also costs more. So now you have something that costs more and has less time to get a payback on. And I think it's only going to get worse.
Yeah,
in 2025.
And they're probably, I mean, like this is one of these things where you think about it and you go like, okay, this is the first time since basically the mainframe that we've had marginal costs. You have to think about marginal cost with computing, but yet we used to have 36-month ROI, 48-month ROI, or whatever. Like it almost seems like insanity to even put a 1 year ROI on it when you go, okay, it's really hard to get chips. I can't get chips the way I could get CPUs, where you get them really short. And oh, by the way, I have shortage of people that actually know how to do this stuff. But let's throw a 12-month ROI on there and kill the project. So I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of people claim that they're trying to do that stuff, and you're going to see a lot of articles that are like, hey, CIOs realize that 90% of projects fail. AI projects fail because they gave up on them, or they were too expensive, or whatever they are. So yeah. No, it'll be interesting.
What you got?
First one I've got is, I think, and this isn't so much a prediction, but just like a thing I think we're going to see throughout the year is sort of government versus AI. So whether it's the new administration coming in in the U.S., whether it's the EU starting to do their thing where they're trying to get out in front of it and turn it into another the EU Act and so forth. You got people doing economic concerns about what's going on with China. China doesn't necessarily want to regulate their stuff, but like, how much are things regulated? Sanctions against China and some of those things. I think there's going to be a lot of sort of government versus AI going on, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be very, very complicated to sort out. How much of this is government? Like, what is the regulation trying to accomplish? What do we think the byproduct of that's going to accomplish? And is this seem like a short-term fix or a long-term fix to stuff? But I think that's going to be a big theme throughout 2025.
Yep, absolutely. I have another one. I'm kind of a Debbie Downer for AI this year, considering I kind of do it as my day job. But here's another one. But I do have a positive one on my third one. But you're hearing more and more about agentic AI. Mm-hmm. And for those that aren't familiar with it, basically think of it as, instead of it generating things or predicting things, it actually does things, right? So It's an agent. There'll be at least one, I'll call it SkyNet scare. And the reason, what made me think about this is there's a AI podcast I listen to. It's two guys, I think they're out of Australia. And they just love to just play with this stuff and see what kind of crazy things they can do with it. And for whatever reason, they love to set it up for gambling.
No, sure, yeah.
And so they had set up two systems. One of them was trading penny stocks, and the other one was doing online poker, like doing vision, analyze the cards, and do whatever. And oh, by the way, both of them made a ton of money, which violated any and all terms of service, and they knew that, and they were just like, we just want to play around and see what happens. But they actually shut everything down because it was like, man, we're starting to make a shit ton of money, and we're going to get like shut down here before too much longer. Yeah. And I think it's only a matter of time before something like that happens, where somebody's just playing around with something. Or let's be honest. I mean, again, you take the stock market. I'm sure all of the big fintechs out there are developing some kind of agentic AI system that'll be able to trade a millisecond faster than everyone else. And who knows what that'll do to the stock markets.
Sure.
So I think there's going to be at least one big national, if not world news, SkyNet scare.
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting. It's I saw sort of a flip side story where somebody had done that. They had run some stuff, and they did the thing where it was like, it ordered pizza by itself, but at the same time it got into some sort of auction trading, auction, like I don't know the right word is, but like trying to bid on like projects for something, like think of like Fiverr or something like that. And basically the system, because it was so deterministic to get to the end result at whatever, was considered best, it basically ended up bidding on the project at zero cost, like, oh, we'll do it for free. And
I will win.
So I will win. And the complete side, the complete opposite of you're making tons of money was, I raced myself to zero because I could do it 24 hours a day, 365. So yeah, there will be several of those, and there will be the stories that will come out of it of like, oh, we can't trust this stuff. So yeah, expect that. I am going to, for weekend perspectives, you mentioned weekend perspectives. One of the things that I've been kind of beating the drum on a little bit is just this search for, interesting AI applications. And I know there are tons of people you can just follow on Twitter and Bluesky and others that, are doing nothing but kind of like, kind of going, hey, here's 25 new interesting things. I am going to try and spend some time each week looking for stuff that, from like an enterprise day-to-day job perspective, like is truly sort of interesting. And I think I'm going to end up doing some weekend perspectives on those as well. So I'm sort of out looking for stuff outside of your typical sort of chatbot plus or developer copilot stuff, and some things like that. So we'll be doing some more of those from a weekend perspective. I don't know if that'll necessarily be like going out and interviewing the companies like we typically do, but at least looking for them and figuring out like, okay, is this an interesting pattern, or is this just, again, some really tiny little shim layer on top of a chatbot or something like that.
Nice. So this is my positive AI prediction for 2025. I think it's going to be the year of inference. And what I mean by that is, like, think about it. There's always been two big: training, tuning, fine tuning, getting it ready for production, and then inference, actually putting it into production. We always talk about training and fine tuning and how expensive it is to build these models. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's a non-profit, loss center for the business. Well, inference is where things make money. And so I think we're going to see a lot of companies kind of make that connection and go, you know what? I don't need to build stuff. I don't need to customize it all that much. I can just take a model, throw some RAG on there, and get it in production with inference as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And I think, inference is going to be like, that's like you were talking about where the big applications and all that. But I think the stages also matter. And so the sooner people can get to inference, which means, it's a money making or optimizing or doing something else that's on the plus side for the business, that connection will be made this year.
All right. So you're predicting positive revenue for a lot of these applications. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's going to be, I know Amazon was talking about that. I mean, AWS was trying to talk about that a lot in reInvent. It'll be interesting to see if they get to that point, beyond a few of them. Yeah, I think the same thing. I think it's going to be, for me, it's not so much a prediction, it's just a thing to keep an eye on, is like, what does the pricing begin to look like? Because I don't know that people necessarily have a good sense of like what some of these things should cost, right? I think, when Amazon was first being like, well, this size CPU cost 8 cents an hour, even that was sort of complicated. But I'm going to be very interested to watch. I've been playing around with a whole bunch of things, and like, it feels like the gap between like, let me try this stuff out and like use it on a regular basis feels like big steps in a lot of cases. And so I'm going to be very interested to see if we start to see the gap between like, get people interested in this stuff and the first level that they can start to do some things, or do we still have these big jumps? And I think those are going to be, kind of directly correlated to the thing you said, which is, if inferencing costs can't come way down, right? And they probably need to come down, 10x from where they are today.
Yeah.
If it's the normal sort of, curves that we tend to see, I think we're going to see a lot more people who get stuck in that first sort of tier. Like, I did free stuff. I kind of did some things, but I wasn't seeing enough, value versus cost, to move to that next level. So I'm going to I got to figure out a way to sort of track that, because the last thing I want to do is have 100, random AI accounts kind of dangling out there that I'm paying $8 a month for, or $20 a month or whatever, because I'll forget about them. But I am.
It's the business equivalent of us having like 10 streaming plans.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So yeah, kind of watching that, individual value versus, versus sort of the dragging on of sort of stepped costs to get to these sort of things. So, and that's part of that's where you see people going like, oh, we have 80,000 developers running Copilot, and you're like, yeah, that's because you didn't have to think, you just bought an SLA, and
Right.
but for like individuals, I still think it feels very clunky. It doesn't feel built into anything we do necessarily yet, and so I'm gonna be keeping an eye on that stuff. So
Yep.
All right, man. Well, I think we've kind of gotten through a lot of stuff. We've gone longer than we anticipated. Thankfully, your cough didn't come along. So, any last thoughts for the year? Any thoughts? Anything you're looking forward to early parts of next year that you want to highlight, or you want to just get out of here?
No, I just wanted to say real quick for everyone out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah.
Looking forward to 2025. As we typically do, we do a little bit of planning, and will be some slight pivots in format and show and all the other things that we're typically doing, and we'll announce that early next year as we go through everything. But you kind of gave the preview with this new, Sunday perspectives might be changing a little bit, and some other things as well that we're considering.
Yeah. But as of now, we're still doing them on Wednesdays and Sundays, so that won't change. You can keep your regular habits and so forth. So, anyways, thanks again to everybody who listens. Thanks to everybody who tells a friend, and thanks for we know you have a lot of choices. We know there are thousands and thousands more podcasts than there were pre-pandemic and so forth. So we appreciate everybody who gives us at least a little bit of your time. So with that. Thanks to you, Aaron. Thanks for the time. Thanks for everybody for listening. And that's a wrap on 2024. We will see you in 2025.